Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalatu wassalamu ala anbiya wal mursalin. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad fatil lima khuliq wal khatil lima sabaq nasrul haq bihaq wa hadi ila siratal mustaqim wa ala alihi haqqil azim. Alhamdulillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh everyone wherever you are. May peace be upon you. We pray that you are in good health, well-being and inshallah in good iman. Amin. Tonight, welcome to another live on Facebook at South Ilahi. And this time, we're going to talk something that is very important for many of us, right? And we have a special guest, Dr. Mazen Atassi. Mashallah, before that, we has hosted him before, and today and tonight, we, mashallah, host him again on an important topic which I mentioned, diabetes and depression. And as we know, our community globally, even Muslims, having a serious issues with diabetes. And what a way to, what a blessed night in month of Rajab to have Dr. Mazen with us. Before we start this interview, let me talk about Dr. Mazen biography for those who are new, right? Dr. Mazen Atassi is a doctor of naturopathic medicine and the founder of Forward to Health. You can check that on his Facebook, Forward to Health. You can join that. It's a very interesting and good Facebook page for us to learn so much about mental health, spiritual, physical. May Allah preserve him. A holistic wellness clinic and educational initiative. Dr. Mazen practices natural medicine with a specialty in somatic body mind trauma therapy. He has studied with Hakim Akshutel, Akshuleta for several years and taken transmission from him. Dr. Mazen also spent time studying in Amman, Jordan. He has patients and students across the world, mashallah. And let us welcome Dr. Mazen. Assalamualaikum, doctor. How are you?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm doing very well, Sidi Khalid.
Mashallah.
Alhamdulillah. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I'm blessed to meet you again, mashallah. We've been looking forward to this because it's always an interesting knowledge and perspective that we learn from you. And so, inshallah, we want to learn about tonight's topic, which I mentioned has been the highest number of people affected with diabetes, even Muslims around the world globally,
Hmm.
right? So, doctor, before we scope on this interview on diabetes, depression, anxiety, trauma, uh, can you explain to us about what is diabetes? Because I personally was diagnosed as diabetes 4 years ago when I had an infection in Istanbul, ketosis, and doctor said that I could have died. So from
Mm.
there onwards, I begin to learn about diabetes type 1, type 2, and also through my journey because I was do a research with my wife. My wife did a lot of research on diabetes, how to go about. And alhamdulillah, I managed to overcome that. I no longer in insulin and so on. But at the
Alhamdulillah.
same time, I realized also when I was doing like this checkup, medical checkup, and hospital and so on, I realized that a lot of people who has diabetes are not necessarily obese or having a disorder eating or they love soda and so on. So that sort of change how I see or perceive diabetes, right? Because most of the time people, even our government, mashallah, they also have a campaign on diabetes and giving knowledge and all that. So maybe perhaps you can explain in details medicals and so on what is actually diabetes. Yeah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad al-Nabi al-Ummi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Alhamdulillah. So it's a good topic. When you told me the topic, Sidi, I was really excited because this is one of the great topics. And people ask me to speak about trauma, and that's fine. Trauma is a very important topic as well. But this one is significant, especially in the time that we're living today with the coronavirus pandemic. And we talk about comorbidities, people talking about these underlying risk factors that are driving infection rates and driving this susceptibility of the virus to affecting them. And this is one of them. The diabetes phenomenon now is something that has been a specific kind of phenomenon and feature of the 21st century, the 20th century. It's not something necessarily very old. It's something that I like to call a civilizational condition that has come about from our modern, postmodern, industrial, technological lifestyles, things that have removed us from the fitrah, essentially. I'll get to talking more about that in a bit, inshallah ta'ala, but I do want to frame that at the beginning, that there is a civilizational shift worldwide that we've all taken away from the natural way of our forefathers, of our ancestors, of the way that Allah ta'ala designed us to be. And this is, in one sentence, basically what diabetes is about, but also what depression is about, and also well, any other conditions, inflammatory conditions, autoimmune conditions. Ultimately, it's the manipulation of the world, of the toxicity of the world, are moving away from the sunnah that has really affected us in this way. But we'll get down to the specifics, inshallah ta'ala. So diabetes basically is a phenomenon. It's a metabolic disorder. And what basically happens is um, a reduction of the function and the physiological function of the pancreas and the systems around the pancreas. The pancreas is what produces multiple cells in the body that help with the assimilation of sugar, like insulin. Insulin takes sugar out of the body and stores it into fat, which then is put in different places in the body, like the liver, for example. And then you have glucagon, which helps increase the sugar in the body after it's been stored away. So you had this balance, this delicate balance in the body. Allah Ta'ala, designed it where that you can eat something, and Allah designed that this insulin molecule, this hormone, in fact, will come and take sugar out of the blood and into the cells for storage. And then when blood sugar dips too low, glucagon, which is part of the pancreas expression as well, will be released to normalize and increase sugar to kind of bring back the balance. And then you have another thing called amylin that will actually bring it down again. So it'll govern glucagon. So you have this delicate balance. All these different parts of the organ and of the physiological system have to be in place. And when there's a destruction or breakdown in one of those things, you lose the capacity for that balance. And then it might take some time, but basically you became, disordered in the way that you handle sugar in some way or other. And that's why the traditional word for diabetes is sugar. You have the sugar, in Arabic, sukkar. Sukkar means sugar. So somebody has sukkar or sukkari, they're diabetic. They're probably dealing with that. So they have the sugar. We have the sugar when we have diabetes. And it's something that's not uncommon. Like I mentioned, there's at least here in America, there's 29 million, which is almost 10% of the population that is diabetic. There's also another 5-10% that's pre-diabetic. So they're not diabetic yet, but they're trending. And so, this is something that we have to be, by 2050, they're saying that 1 in 2 will be diabetic here in the States. Worldwide, there's 600 million people that are diabetic, right? 600 million, 500 million pre-diabetics. So that's over 1 billion people. That's 1 in 7 of us are dealing with this thing that wasn't here a couple hundred years ago to the beginning of time. So we have to ask our question. We have to ask these questions. What is going on? What is going on that the entirety of mankind is being gripped by a condition where certain physiological functions are being lost, and there is a breakdown of the order of the system. And because of the interconnection of all these systems, you're finding more than just a loss of metabolism of sugar, but also things like depression, things like anxiety, things like inflammatory disorders, things like autoimmune conditions. These things are not neatly packaged separate phenomena. These are all connected. And so that really at the basic kind of overview, that's what diabetes is.
Interesting, doctor. But I think globally also because of sugar, you mentioned sugar and commercialization of sugar that caused with soda drinks and some junk food going on. But also at the same time, sometimes we don't realize how people triggered. Just now we mentioned about perhaps it's depression, trauma, or even anxiety, right? So I also realized when I started to look into this diabetes seriously, uh, I begin to realize that there are studies that say diabetes can contribute to the development of depression. People with diabetes are twice as likely to develop depression. This occur due to alterations to the brain chemistry, as you also mentioned just now, about how it affect our system and all that. There are also studies that show depression can lead to development of diabetes. So same in one way or another in a different form. So
Mhm.
can you help us to share with us about how these two scenarios happen so that we can
Yeah,
learn and assess and help our friends? Yeah.
very good. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So before that, let me just jump in real quick and clarify. There's two main types of diabetes. For those that maybe that may not be familiar, so type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. Generally, in the younger people tend to be um, diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And basically, the autoimmune condition is the body attacking the beta cells of the pancreas. The beta cells are what produce insulin in the body. And so there's a lack of insulin in the body, right? This is, people often say this is a genetic phenomenon. It's not genetic necessarily. The majority of the cases, 70, 80%, are actually um, spontaneous. There's no family history at all, even though it's oftentimes kind of spoken to as such. And then you have type 2 diabetes, which is a lot, insulin sensitivity, insulin insensitivity. So you have these cells in the body that are able to receive insulin and to store the sugar and the fat away. And those receptors on the cells become less, they become blunted, they become diminished in some way. And so the insulin is just, and the sugar is just coursing in the blood, and there's no way for it to kind of escape. Okay, so there's kind of two, and those tend to be adult onset. Those tend to be kind of later in life manifestations. Though now, because of the gravity of our situation, really, we're finding people younger and younger developing type 2 diabetes now, even in their teenagers and even younger than that. And so this is something that, before used to be kind of two groups, two camps, and they were like clean camps. Now it's not. Now it's just all of us are getting. There's also gestational diabetes with with mothers who are expecting. You have you have latent autoimmune adult um, diabetes, so forth, and you have other types of diabetes, but those are the main forms of it. Okay, so in terms of the gut-brain connection, which is what you were alluding to, right? So I don't think that depression is caused by these chemicals in the brain that are becoming, disbalanced necessarily as at a root cause level. That is also happening in some way, but there's a progression, and it's not causal. So when you have, these links between depression and low serotonin and low dopamine, those are chemicals in the brain. But actually, in fact, the majority, I mean, I'm talking about 90% of those hormones are produced not actually in the brain. They're produced in the gut. They're produced in our gut, in our gastrointestinal system, in the microbiome. The microbiome, which I may have discussed last time, but it's worth taking some time today to really expound on, is this ecosystem of microorganisms. It's this ecosystem of life within us, consisting of viruses, of bacteria, of fungi, of protozoa, of even parasites sometimes, that are symbiotic with life, that exist in parallel and harmony with us inside of our bodies and outside. We have, them all over. You have, bacteria like Staph aureus is all over our body. We have streptococcus in our throats naturally. People get strep throat. Oh, I caught strep throat. No, you didn't catch strep throat. It's already there. but the conditions for it to be aggravated by stress and diet and all these different things, toxins in the environment, those conditions aroused were aroused, and then the streptococcus was able to colonize and grow, and then you have an infection. But the strep is already there, right? So we're covered in and out with these microorganisms, and these things live with us symbiotically. Some people say even that they outnumber our cells in the body 10 to 1 or 5 to 1. So there's more of these microorganisms than there are actual human cells in this package here, in this being, which is an amazing reflection. It's an amazing thing to ponder. Oh, Allah, why did Allah Ta'ala do that? So we are products of nature. We are interconnected with nature in a deep and profound way. And so it is in the breakdown of the microbiome of this ecosystem that resides in our gut that, and which produces serotonin and dopamine, that we find this link, somewhat of the beginnings of this link between diabetes, leaky gut syndrome, inflammation of the gut, which we'll talk about in a moment, and depression, anxiety, and any other type of psychological and emotional conditions, right? So, I mean, the connection there is uncanny. The connection there is, it's known intuitively, I think, by all peoples, but we've lost that. People think, I remember at some point when I was in my undergrad, and I was beginning to be interested in this. This is about 15 years ago. I was interested in these types of things. And I remember just hearing about the microbiome and running it past my microbiology teacher at the time and asking them what they thought about it. And they laughed at it. Like, there's no way this is, even though there were studies, even though, there were, significant findings being published and books being written, and it was like at the leading edge of this field. This person had been teaching microbiology at a good university, public university, for 20, 30 years. And they laughed at that, they laughed at it. Now it's a leading edge. Now, if you don't follow it, if you don't believe in it, then you're not being scientific, because the science is all directing the awareness now, not just, idle fancy. So what we want to do is be able to appreciate that this gut-brain connection is something that's really deep. And in fact, the enteric nervous system, the nervous system of the GI system, is actually older from this evolutionary model. If we were to take this evolutionary model of the brain, of the nervous system, developing in different stages and so forth, which we don't necessarily take as Muslims, but it's interesting that, they say that the enteric nervous system, that the nervous system of the gut, is actually older than any other nervous system that we have, especially our central nervous system, our brain, our spine, all of that. So this is an old system. The heart also has its own nervous system as well, which is fascinating. But the gut is its oldest one, and it produces all these feel-good hormones. I mean, what is it about when you're fed well and then you just feel good? When your mother cooks you a nice meal, or your wife, or you're out with friends and you have a good meal, you say, Alhamdulillah. It nourishes every cell in your body, right? And that is because in some way, these things are produced by a microbiome that's healthy, by a gut lining that's healthy, and so forth. So, we have to be able to have this holistic perspective that all these different systems are connected. The Hakims of the past, of every tradition, I say this all the time, the Hakims of the Muslim tradition, of the Ayurvedic tradition, of the Chinese tradition, TCM, of homeopathy, of native indigenous medicine here in America and Australia, anywhere else in the world, in Africa, all these places have this understanding of the unity of the human being, the unity of disease, the expression of the vital force, the body, mind, soul relationship, and the expression of disease through all these different planes of being. And now we've lost that. Now what we find in the conventional model is a reductionism that divides everything. You have your metabolic system, you have your immune system, you have your neurology, you have your psychology, you have your hormone system, your endocrine system, and they're all separate systems, to the point that you go to a specialist and they'll just look at what they know, and they won't look at how what they're treating is connected to everything else, and how their treatment is affecting everything else too. They're just focused on this, which is very myopic. It's very limited in scope. So what we want to do is be able to open that up and understand that the leading edge of science itself, this is not the Hakim speaking, the leading edge of science now is blending all these different disciplines. And there's now like very integrative disciplines called psycho, neuro, endo, immunology, which is the merging of the psychology and the neurology, the nervous system, the immune system, the metabolic syndrome, all of that in one, because they're understanding it's one whole. You can't break what's whole, even if it's convenient, right? So we have that understanding. And also because of, I think the other question was how psychological experience can inform physiology. Because of the connection, because of the interconnectedness between the body and the mind and the soul, right? That your state implicitly will embed itself on the cells of your body. So if you are in a place of shukr, and you are in a place of rida with Allah Ta'ala, and husn dhan, and you're in that sweet spot, even though things may be difficult for you, it's going to have, if you will, a ruhani, energetic quality. Aside from just the nervous system, we can talk about the science, but I'm talking as Muslims here. We talk about the ruh, we talk about the hal, we talk about this connectedness, this barakah, the vital force, the ruh that flows in the body. We speak as Muslims, right? That will flow and inform every single cell and every single tissue and every single organ system in the body. Absolutely. And we know this now. The leading edge of science is always talking about this now. Consciousness. How does medicine and consciousness connect? And you can do some research about that. It's not a new thing. This is something that people have been exploring for decades, but now science is kicked on, and there's a whole new horizon now of exploration happening in the, hallowed halls of science. But ultimately, the hal imprints. The nervous system will imprint, right? And because the nervous system is what governs so much of our physiology, now you find that when someone is anxious or depressed or in any type of state, the nervous system will begin to reflect that. And because the nervous system connects the whole body, it's like a web. If you look at like a anatomical dissection of the body, and seeing the nervous system and how it flows, it goes everywhere and it connects everything. And it's basically a hub of information. It's a hub of information that goes up and down. So the brain is not only sending commands down to the body, but it's receiving. It's receiving 70-80% of the vagal nerve, which is what flows, the cranial nerve that flows from the brain to the rest of the body here. 70-80% of it is an ascending information, not descending information, right? It's sending information up. So these things are connected so deeply, and it's really important for us to be able to understand that everything that we do, our salah, and our dhikr, and our mindset, the place that we're in, affects our physiology, and also our diet and our hydration status and our sleep and our exercise and the toxicity of the environment that we're in, or its cleanliness, will affect our psyche.
Interesting, doctor. MashaAllah. Beautiful. Explanation on both sides. The diabetes leads to depression, and depression leads to diabetes. Now we see the connection between the soul, the mind, the heart, and every organ, right? So, doctor, before I'm moving forward with you, this is getting more interesting. For those who are watching us live, you can send in your question pertaining to the subject itself, diabetes and depression or anxiety with diabetes at 906-87106. I repeat this, 906-87106. And if you are overseas, you just add on +65 906-87106. Inshallah. We have some interesting question coming in, but I just like to go back to the 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 knowledge that you shared about genetic, right? And in our community in Singapore itself, the Muslim community, or even as a whole, even a non-Muslim community, we always have this idea that genetic means you're confirmed even if you take good care of your body, your health, and your mind, and everything. How do we break away from this? I think this is very important because just now
Hmm.
you mentioned not necessarily that you will get, even though it's genetic, right, doctor? So
Exactly. Great
so
question.
how do we go about with this in educating our community in saying that no, it's not completely true. I would say the right word, true,
Yeah.
the truth, that genetic, that means you will get it even if you take care of your food and everything. Yeah, doctor.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I was hoping someone would ask that question. So the interplay between genetics and the environment is a critical thing to understand. Okay, we are not deterministic in the way as Muslims nor as modern scientific people. At some point, genetics was understood to be very deterministic. This is why they went up and tried to map the whole genome, and that was the year 2000 ish. They completed mapping the entire genome. And they thought, okay, now that we have the blueprint for health and disease for the human being, we're going to be able to understand the link of every single gene with every single disease condition and be able then to treat prophylactically, preventatively before it expresses itself and to heal that person. Of course, that failed. I mean, it's very cool that they were able to map the genome, but their intention in its application was never met because that's not how it works. And they found very quickly that all these billions that were invested in the genome and this biotech, companies was all waste because they took out the most important factor of genetics, which is the epigenetic expression of these genes in the environment. Some people have kind of described it as such. If genetics is the bullet in the chamber of a gun, something is there, you have a proclivity, you have a family pattern, you have something in what some may have called the morphic field. The morphic field is the energetic field that connects us in our families and our friends and even our ancestors energetically. There can be something in that field or something genetically that you've been uh, uh, you know transmitted generationally that can load the gun. It puts the bullet in the chamber, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger. So think of it as a switch. If there's a certain gene, if there's one certain gene on one chromosome of your cells that can incline towards that type of expression of diabetes in the body when it's expressed, the environment is what can turn on and off that gene. The environment is from your habit, your lifestyle, and also the actual environment around us. Okay. So, for example, you find in type 1 diabetes that if one parent has had type 1 diabetes, there's a 10% likelihood that the child will also have it. If both parents have it, it's about 30, right? So about, again, 60, 70% of them, though, are spontaneous. With type 2 diabetes, it's a little bit different, but again, it's still not determined 100%. If one parent has it, 30, 40% likelihood that the child will have it. If both parents have it, it's about 60, 70% likely that the child will have it as well. But these are not determined, right? These are not determined. Anybody out there right now, I don't make claims, I don't make promises, but it's always possible to heal. There's nothing, I mean, there's a handful of genetic, you know, conditions that they change the way the actual structure of the body and the organs function. And when there's structural defects, it's very difficult obviously to have sound physiological function. That's from the will of Allah. But like for the majority of us, we have good function, good structure, we just lost it, right? It's broken down over time because of errors of lifestyle, errors of thinking, the environment that we're in being unhealthy and un just unhealthy, and not familiar to us in our physiology, and so affecting us negatively. Yeah. So it's not necessarily the genetics. If it's genetics, then all of us are just sit back and just drink our soda, and we can't do anything about that, right? And that's not the way, though. That's not the way. The way is to have himma and to change, to transform ourselves, to change ourselves for the better, to follow the perfect one, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are things that we want to be able to bring into our lives. One of the most amazing things about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that they describe in the Shama'il. He and this is not, this is, we all love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is our standard. I'm not saying this to shame anybody, obviously, right? But he always had a flat stomach. The Prophet said he always had a flat stomach, right? And again, it's something I know you wanted to talk about with obesity, the link of obesity and diabetes. And there is a link. You don't have to be obese to have diabetes, but it's something just of a reflection for me, like the health of the Prophet ﷺ, that he always had a flat stomach, broad shoulder. He was strong and lean and fit. This is something that's important. This is part of his sunnah, if you will. It's part of his sunnah to be that way. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So these are things that we want to be able to appreciate, inshallah. Does that answer your
Mashallah.
question?
Yeah, I believe so. And I mean, I think I agree with you. The Prophet ﷺ did not have obesity, and shame on me, and we need to work it out. I think I remember Sheikh Hamza Yusuf was saying about that too, and
Mm.
he says that he said that he was doing, if I'm not mistaken, he said he was doing hiking, and some Muslim folks who were younger than him, and then they said they were like, they were puffing and they were struggling. I said, guys, what's happening?
Yeah,
Mashallah.
exactly.
Yeah, so mashallah. And I think one important note that you mentioned is also environment. And I think that is difficult for many of us, especially when you had an environment where you work shift hours, you work long hours, and then sometimes the work, you lose your mind, you lose your sleep, because everything is just work, 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 and it becomes like a zombie, that kind
Yeah,
of
exactly.
configuration, I would say. So how do we just uh, step back and say, okay, we're gonna break this away? And I know that I met some people that they completely unable to realize the repercussion of it.
Mm.
They like, oh, uh, I find it hard, I find it difficult because I'm not used to it, and I'm gonna change. So how do we go about with it, doctor, in a wisdom manner, and also at the same time for us to learn? Because sometimes we forgot with all the workloads, especially in this pandemic where people work from home, and sometimes bosses, I'm sorry to say, when you work from home, they think that you are having a good time, so they give more
Mm.
workload, right?
Mm.
So what's your advice for such people, in such environment?
Let me step back one bit, please, first, and just describe more about the environment. Because definitely stress and work and no play and no relaxation is going to have a huge impact. But when I talk about environment, I'm also talking about toxicity of the environment. And it's important just for me just to bring this up because it's such a critical role, plays such a critical role here. So, for example, what we find, and I wanted to connect it with the gut, what we find is in the modern agricultural practices, they oftentimes spray. I mean, there's 4.6 billion gallons of this pesticide called glyphosate that's sprayed all over the world. It's a water soluble toxin that was actually made during the Vietnam War by the Americans to deforest the rich, thick canopy of forest in Vietnam so that they can see the Viet Cong and the guerrillas and kill them. So it was something that was sprayed all over Vietnam. And I mean, it works. It causes the leaves to crumble and for the thick, dense canopy to dwindle and for them to see the ground from the top. So after the war, they wanted to be able to continue to use this thing, right? Like oftentimes in war, there's a research and development that's upregulated, and then there's all this, left over. Like Kleenex, for example, is often talked about as being, an artifact of wartime production, and then they just make it available for civilian use, right? Even BMW, I remember reading or hearing at some point that they used to make planes It's like the engines for planes. And then after the war ended, they actually ended up just making engines for cars and getting into car business. And that was, but they were German and they were making war engines for the German Reich. Allah. So glyphosate. So glyphosate is something that's sprayed all over. And what it basically does when it reaches our bodies is it gets down into the cells of our gut lining. So it's on our food, it's in the air, it's in the water that we're breathing and water that we're drinking. And when you get this glyphosate molecule into our bodies, what it does is actually begin to open up the gut lining. It begins to actually, it releases things called zonulin. And zonulin is this neurotransmitter kind of compound in the body that opens up the junctions, the tight junctions that connect the cells of the gut, which should never be opened, right? These things should never be opened. The lining is one cell thick and it lets in the good things and keeps the bad things out. What you find is that the glyphosate will begin to open that thing and let chemicals and let negative things that body would never allow naturally into the body. And these things have massive hormone, massive immune, right, implications on the entire body. They disturb the microbiome, of course, like we talked about. And so this is doing damage all over the world. It's water soluble, this glyphosate. So it's in our water tables. It's in the rain that comes down because it will evaporate and then get into the clouds and it rains down on us. I mean, it is the most pernicious, really, of compounds in our environment. And so this is something that I really want us to be able just to begin to attune to and just to be aware of, that this thing does exist. It's uncanny. I mean, it's unbelievable. One of the ways that we can avoid it is to eat organic, if that is available to you and accessible. But these are only kind of surface level solutions, because at the end of the day, this stuff is everywhere. And this is the type of thing in our environment that is driving so much of cancer, of autoimmune disease, of inflammatory disease. I mean, again, it depends on your genetics, depends what's in the chamber, but the environment will pull the trigger on whatever's in the chamber. So if you have heart disease in your family, if you have really thick, difficult depression in your family, it may be just that the glyphosate or the other toxins and organophosphates and heavy metals and the EMF, radiation from our devices and our technology, all these things they can pull the trigger. Just wanted to name that. There's rich things, right? Really deep things. But so stress and toxicity are the two things which are environmental and negatively affecting our health. Stress, psychological stress, we can say, and toxicity yielding inflammation, and metabolic stress, oxidative stress. So these are things, to note. Before we get into solutions and into recommendations, I do want to put a caveat out there that anything that I do talk about here should be, brought to your primary care physician, your specialist, ideally your naturopathic doctor, if you have naturopathic doctors in your locale that are licensed and all of that, not just your normal, health coach or whatever, but an actual trained, at medical school and board certified licensed naturopathic doctor. These people will help you more than anybody, inshallah ta'ala, but also just checking in with your regular specialist and primary care physicians and working synergistically with any other advice that you get to optimize your health, because these things should be individualized. There could be complications. Every case is different. So please make sure that you don't take my advice and just go run with it. Please see your doctor. Okay. So in terms of environment, it's very difficult when you're working, especially nowadays, when people are being, fired left and right and furloughed here in the States without any pay, without any recompense, to have, to be able to say, I'm going to just take a break and I'm going to just, go travel somewhere now. And I'm going to go do Umrah, spend a month in Medina and just recover. People were doing that pre-COVID, if you remember. I remember I did that, and I did that for a year at some capacity. And so we all need these things. And for us to be able to really Take the time to really find how we can begin to implement play and rest, because that is going to be the break, the rihla, just kind of the journey that begins the healing journey, right? It's going to be the break that allows for the healing journey to commence. It's very difficult when we're overloaded with stress, when overloaded with toxicity, to make any changes, right? The Hakims talk about the two-pronged approach to healing. One is the himya, and the other is the dawa. The himya is the fasting regimen, and the second is the medicine. And the Hakim say you cannot give the medicine until you have established the fast first, because it won't work. Because the fasting is what allows for the vital force to be uncoupled from these old patterns that are driving disease, and it makes room for change. Basically, fasting makes room for change. This is why we have Ramadan for us. We all feel more energetic in Ramadan, even though we're not eating, because of this exact same phenomenon. It's a breaking of habits, and it's allowing the vital for the ruh to really find a new normal, a new healthy normal, right? Which is more in line with our fitrah. That's why Ramadan is so gorgeous, right? So it's something we need to be able to have whatever situation that you're in. First thing I'll share is we have to have a fast, not necessarily a food fast. If you identify that there is an environment that you are struggling in, find ways to move away from that. Find ways to bring play, to bring nature. Take a trip with the family to somewhere in the country. Go to the beach. You need to be able to tap into nature, ultimately. Tapping into nature. When you fast, you're tapping into the deep nature of the human being, the deep fitrah, the deep physiology, the deep psychology of the human being. That's what heals you. Sumu tasahhu, fast and you will be well, said our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because it connects you back to the fitrah. And that is always going to be from the beginning of time, Adam alayhi salam, until the blowing of the horn of Israfil. That's going to be the greatest way for us to return back, in a nutshell, back to fitrah, back to nature. So number one is fast from your postmodern technological industrial world that we're all succumbed to in some capacity, and reconnect back home to nature. Put your feet in the soil. Go to the beach and put your hand in the sand, and put your body in the water, and put your kids in the soil. Take off their shoes and let them feel the microbiome, the macrobiome, right? This huge energetic and this huge web of life around us, right? This is what will allow us to begin to implement that fast, that himya, that then makes the dawa, the medicine, the actual prescription, even more effective, inshallah ta'ala. We need to come back to nature. Human beings are not going to be able to be human beings in a vacuum. Never mind in a machine, in a technological machine. The human being is a made for Jannah. It's from Jannah. It's made for Jannah. Allah gave us a Jannah planet. It's dunyawi. There's negative things here. We have hawa and nafs and these things, but it's also gorgeous, and it's a mini reflection of Jannah. And we have to come back to those roots of ours. And that is the first thing I would tell people is find ways to inject, not even inject, just to shift the pattern from one that is mechanical and technological. Because these things, the dunya and our jobs and stuff like that, they'll make us feel like we're machines, like we're animals. And of course, it's going to stress you out. And of course, it's going to affect every cell of your body. So we have to reclaim play. We have to reclaim the way that we engage and connect to ourselves and one another and to nature itself, right? Nature is a huge medicine for us. It's an invitation back to something constantly. And the door is always there. We live in parallel to nature. I say all the time, we live parallel to nature. We don't live in nature like other animals, other creations of Allah do. And that's what makes us diseased, and our coming back to ourselves, coming back to our nature is our coming back and forward to health, inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah, beautifully explained, Doctor. And thanks for putting up also, making us understand that some people have this sort of chronic diseases due to the environment, the toxicity, stress, and even volatile environment. Because I met many of them, and I think a lot of us don't really understand what they are going through, right? And until what you mentioned, to break away from such environment, then only they are able to change and have the courage and see things as it is. MashaAllah, Allah bless you for
Mm,
sharing that with us. Uh, Also, you mentioned about we need to go into a certain places, or means just to break away from our daily routine, like stress and work and all that. And I know a lot of people doing exercise, a lot of people running, and now in Singapore the trend is bicycle, cycling.
mm, mm,
And everyone is cycling because it's pandemic, and now it just open slowly, so everybody's into it. But the question is like, how psychologically, right, for someone who, I think many of them are watching this, you know, to just say that I need to break away from work, or so that I can have time for my health and my being. What sort of steps do you recommend them to do?
mm. So it's a difficult question because it's so variable. Everyone has different situation. This is why the individualized care is so important, because I can't just give this generalized, platitude
Yeah, I
about
understand that.
how to, everything's in. I spend 2 hours with my new patients, and half of that time I'm trying to find out exactly how I'm going to reach them,
Mm.
how I'm going to, where are they, and how can I reach them, and then help support them moving forward. So
Mashallah,
it's tough to
beautiful, doctor.
say. It's tough to say, but what you want to do is, uh, number one, first of all, you have to make an intention. I mean, that's something that takes no effort, inshallah ta'ala. A really sound intention. If it's difficult for you to move at any point, make an intention to Allah ta'ala to give you a change, to give you health, give you strength, give you tawfiq, and being able to practice what you've learned here today, for example, or what you already know, probably. You all know what's good and not good, what's right and not right, what's healthy and strong. You remember the vitality of when you were young, and playing for hours, and no joints would hurt, and no knees would snap and crack, and no jaws would grind, and you remember that time, and that's time still available to you, and you go and you ask Allah Ta'ala for tawfiq. How can I begin to do this? One thing that I tell people sometimes who are inclined towards reading and studying, be interested and learn more about it. The more knowledge that you have about it, watch some YouTube lectures, read some books. Maybe we can make available some books, but really just become curious about it. If you can open up your curiosity, okay, I'm not going to necessarily jump into the gym and change my diet and do a 60-day plan and blah blah blah, but let me just begin to learn a little bit more about this. Okay, now you've opened the door. And curiosity is a place, is a state of the fitra, in its purity. Wallahi, I mean, the child is nothing but curious. I have a two and a half, 3-year-old now, and she's always everything every day. Why? Baba, let's go eat. Why? Baba, let's go for a walk. Why? Baba, take off your shoes. Why? I mean, and why is it snowing from the sky? Like, what? Why? Why does it snow here? And why does it taste like this? And she's so curious, and it's this beautiful thing to witness. It's like we have to be able to regain that in some way. And so, making intention, learning about this, develop your curiosity. And I encourage people that if you can find a little group, you can do, make a WhatsApp group or something, Facebook group of like-minded people who can begin to share resources and just be that positive encouragement for others. Like today, alhamdulillah, I fasted and I broke my I had a thought with this meal. Alhamdulillah, I cut out the carbs. I'm cutting out bread for 30 days. Just, and maybe I'm minimizing rice, to instead of having a plate full of rice, having like a little, like a little ball of rice and lots of veggies and some protein and healthy fats and stuff like that. Great. And that's encouragement for people. And And also, I would encourage one more thing is to keep things simple. So don't make too many changes at one time. If you can incorporate, for example, a walk after dinner, have your dinner early at 6 p.m., and then go for a half an hour walk with your family or whatever, that could be a tremendous shift. I tell people if you can get your body moving every single day, you'll make much less errors in your diet. And when you make less errors in your diet, you have more energy and more clarity of thought. And you're going to begin to appreciate, wow, these changes, even just within a couple of days, are yielding massive results. I'm already feeling a difference in my awareness of self, my energy levels. My headache isn't here today because I didn't have gluten or dairy, or I slept well, or because I got some my blood flowing and everything. So these are things that just I'm throwing things out there for you, but inshallah ta'ala, something can land for each and every one of you. These are things that you can begin to take and implement, and Allah gives tawfiq, inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah, doctor. Thank you. And thank you also for highlighting to us that not everyone has the same generic way of dealing with the body, because each one of us are different, metabolism and so on. And also, thank you also for sharing that it's not easy for people with volatile environment to break away, because I think a lot of assumption. And I feel sad because I met a lot of these people who are suffering from diabetes because of that and kind of environment, toxic family, So, may Allah make us, be kind to people and be nice to people.
Yeah.
And also, alhamdulillah, we have quite number of groups actually in Singapore. Some Muslim brothers are doing it, and mashallah, may we be the means of hope for others.
Mhm.
Inshallah. Doctor, I forgot the key word just now you mentioned about food, the wholesomeness of food instead
Mm.
of getting a regular food. And the wholesomeness of food, usually even in Singapore, very expensive. And
The organic food.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so
Same
usually
here.
people are sort of like, for example, for those who cannot afford because of their financial constraint.
Yeah.
So, what would you suggest then? How do we be creative? I know you mentioned about we need to start watching, learning, reading. So for them, how do we go about in saying to them like, okay, you can try this or that for as an alternative, you know?
Hmm. Good.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Organic food. It's
yeah,
an
organic.
amazing thing, yani, subhanallah, because 100 years ago there wasn't a thing called organic or non-organic. It was just food, you know. And now you have this differentiation where you have access to regular food called organic. I mean, it's not special food, it's just regular food, regular tayyib food from the earth. And then you have this other type of food, and it's not to scare anybody or upset anybody, but just you should know this. Then you have this other food, which is sprayed and genetically modified. And those things are linked. The same people that genetically modify the food are the ones that are spraying it, and they're spraying them because they're resistant to the negative effects of Monsanto, apparently. You know, but it still gets inside of us. So even though it's not affecting the plant, it's affecting us. So it's still affecting, and but then you have this organic, and then you have this, this food that people who are spraying it are wearing like a spacesuit. You see them wearing this like white looking spacesuit with a shield, and it's like, if that's going on my, why are you wearing that if you're spraying that on my food and then making it cheaper for me to buy than the other stuff? It's madness. Like, once you can see that, it's actually a madness, and it's just a sign of the times. It really, like, we should know this. Like, this is not something talked about. You should know that's happening. Okay. But I hear you. It's expensive here too. Not everyone has access to it, and even then, they'll have just like a small section at the grocery store for organic, and not everyone can buy it. So what can we do? Well, the first thing I say is, there's a list by the Environmental Working Group, EWG. They have a great website, great database. online. There's two lists. One's called the Clean 15, and the other is called the Dirty Dozen. The Clean 15 are 15 foods that you don't have to buy organic because they've been found to not be affected so much by the glyphosate. They have a thick skin like an orange or banana, and they seem like, yeah, they're just unaffected by the negative effects of that specifically, or more directly that like other, uh, they're affected less than other fruits and veggies are. Then you have the Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen are 12 foods that are tremendously affected by the poisoning of glyphosate. And so these are things like berries, they're things like apples, certain other things. And so you can find these lists online, the Clean 15, Dirty Dozen. That would be a good starting point for people. Since we're on diabetes, of course, I want to say, leaving the processed foods, of course, has to be mentioned, right? We have to be able to step away from the processed industrial foods. Anything that's boxed, that's canned, that's bagged, that's filled with preservatives and chemicals. If you can't pronounce it, don't eat it. Is a rule of thumb. Really, wallahi, don't eat it. Anything with high fructose corn syrup. I'm not sure if that's a thing in Singapore. Here in the States, everything is filled with corn syrup, right? High fructose corn syrup. Which is a huge leading, driver of diabetes and all types of metabolic and psychological ailments. And so that's one thing. Gluten is another thing. Gluten's been, connected, correlated scientific to studies about gluten and diabetes. Using A2 milk, so A1, A2 milk. I'm not sure if you have access to that in Singapore or different places. People may be listening. A1, A2, A1 has, is milk coming from A1 cows, which has histamine in there, which can cause a histamine reaction in many people, allergic reaction. Where A2, that histamine amino acid is exchanged with proline, which does not have that same effect and is much easier. I told people if you have access to raw milk, meaning unpasteurized, unhomogenized milk, that's best. Sometimes it's illegal to sell that. You can find it here, and hopefully you can find it there as well, and wherever you are in the world. You might have to buy it and promise to only feed your animals. They'll say, a sticker for animal use only, and I'll go there and I'll say, yes, this is for my animals, and I come back home and feed my family, and we are haywan. So we're not lying, inshallah. We are haywan natak. We are, adami animals, but animals nonetheless, right? So these are things that I'd like to mention. So much more to mention, but I'll leave that for now.
Thank you, Doctor. I think it's very interesting, all that you mentioned. And I think it's time for all many of us to read up, to understand and learn what are the alternatives that we can
Yeah,
have for food, right?
yeah.
Thank you very much. This is one question coming, few questions coming in. But then again, I'd like to say this very clear to all the viewers. If you send a question, because doctor also do not want to say something that can go against your condition. Like he mentioned earlier, he needs to know you personally and diagnose you and all that. So some question, I'm sorry, we are not able to ask, because not because we do not want, but we do not to want to take the risk also. I apologize for that. But there's one few question, doctor. I think this is very interesting question. I think many of us going through it about managing diabetes when we already got better, right? And then the ability to discipline the self is very difficult, because sometimes when you go back into the world again, and you go through it, so you fail to maintain it over the years. What you think can be done to instill that, like what you said just now, the intention, the environment, all that. Is there like some people saying that, how do we go about then? We stop and then we retrace back, or yeah, of course we're gonna go to doctor and check again and the blood, all that. But how do one restart again?
Mm. It's
Yeah.
it's a good question. Yeah, I've never met anybody that has been able to make a change and see to that change 100% without any falling back, or which tells me that this is exactly what human nature is all about. It's like asking for for perfection in from sin. We're not masoom. We're not the anbiya. We're going to make mistakes. Expect to make mistakes. Maybe even look forward to making mistakes. I mean, just it's going to happen. And so the less shame and pressure and stress we put on ourselves around being perfect or about maintaining it, and just allowing for those days off, allowing for these things to come and go. I mean, you're going to have days. You're going to have holidays, you're going to have birthdays, you're going to have traveling, you're going to having maybe lack of access, you're going to be having whatever, we're all in a difficult time now, especially with coronavirus and lockdowns. And we're all feeling tired, we're all feeling lonely, we're feeling stressed, we're feeling disconnected from ourselves. We've all maybe gained a little bit of weight. We've all kind of lost some of the goals that we had, achieved previous to the pandemic, so forth. And so this is not a time for rigor. It's not a time for hardcore discipline. It's a time for curiosity. It's a time for gentleness. It's time for finding how we can begin to return to something more beautiful and wholesome, and let the process unfold on its own. So if you fall back a little bit, fall back, and then you will find your way back to where you need to go. And that's how you keep things going, because people, more often than not, when they go so hard, they will burn out. They lose steam. You see, even spiritually, people will go into the tariq, they have a sheikh and the bay'ah, and they have all these awrad, and within 3 years later, they're committing zina. Astaghfirullah azim. I've seen this before. I'm helping people through this right now, and it's scary. This burnout phenomenon is very scary. And so we have to be able to also appreciate that in the health journey. You don't want to burn out. You want longevity. And having a rigid mindset around certain things. Of course, if there's a medical necessity and there's a little bit of urgency, hopefully that can push you a little bit forward and increase that himma. But if you begin to falter, then you should have that group around you. You should speak to your physician, maybe speak to some other support, and give yourself just a break, because ultimately you don't want this healing journey to be another task, another burden on you. It's supposed to be how you release and relax and come back to something beautiful embedded within health and connection and all of that. But if it's another thing you have to do, you have this crazy schedule, and now I have to make all my meals at home, and I have to walk, after dinner, and maybe do some weights earlier in the day, and do my meditation, qigong, and I mean, you're not going to be able to probably sustain that from the beginning in the way that you want to. It might take 10 years for you to establish that as a habit and undo all the habits of our modern culture and modern lifestyle. That's okay. That's okay. That's expected. That's normal. That's natural. We're not super people. And there's a lot going on today. So we have to be able just to identify that, right? When you're feeling like you've been wrong, again, come back to the intention, ask Allah Ta'ala for tawfiq, and take small steps. What's worked for you before? Is it easy for you to take a break from work and then go? Then do that. Is it easy for you just to begin to go to the gym with a couple friends and play some basketball and not work out, but just go with friends, go swimming, go to the beach? Like, what do you like to do? I tell people, you tell me, what's your hobby? What do you like to do? Do you like bicycling? Do you like to go hiking? Do you like to ski in here in the winter? There's snow outside. Do you like to go skiing? What do you like to do? And give yourself that. Give yourself that. That's not nafs. That's not, you're not giving yourself, your desires. If you're giving yourself raha, just a time away, you're not doing that. It's the opposite. And actually, this is a very negative, toxic way of thinking about it. You have to be able to play. Again, I use that word because it really connotes so much. We have to find play in our lives and curiosity and that spaciousness where we can begin to really find that energy and that resolve that we're looking for to be well and stay well, inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah, doctor. Thank you. It's very, very full in explaining how to manage ourselves. And I think you are right. Even for myself and a lot of people, sometimes we go hard and we think like that's how to maintain, but we forgot that this is a marathon. It's not a 100-meter sprint. And that's why when we go down, trying to be istiqamah, and that's why we fall flat,
Yeah.
right? So I think this is where we need to. I think the amount of pressure also nowadays, everybody going keto, going intermittent fasting, and then you feel like, hey, I'm not there, I'm not maintaining myself, and then people are not giving the right advice. And alhamdulillah, mashallah, thank you for tonight, doctor. Inshallah. Uh, Another thing that you mentioned just now, which I recall, is the hydration.
Mm.
Um, I've heard of water therapy. Quite a number of my friends, they do this therapy, water therapy. In your own experience, doctor, how can staying properly hydrated help us with our health? And is that really important?
Yes, it's very important, actually. I mean, we were all created from water. We live on a water planet. Our entire beings are made from water. Allah Ta'ala said that He created all created things from water. And so, water is the basis of life. And water is not just this blank slate where everything else happens. Water is the thing where things emerge from, you know, literally, energetically, the minerals and the salts and the energetics, if you will, of water is what allows for so much of the cell, so much of the tissue, and all of that to happen. Now, water and sugar follow each other. So biochemically, you find also people who are diabetic that they urinate a lot because they're not able to retain the water.
Mm,
Uh, and in some capacity, we have you're not going to correct that by drinking more water. You're going to probably end up urinating more because there's an underlying issue there. But in general, maintaining healthy, filtered, clean water is important. The hydration is important, but also the cleanliness and the purity of the water. Because if you're having tap water, like here in Chicago, they say the water's clean, but the facilities are 100 years old and they're not taking out the Prozac and the birth control pills and the glyphosate. Again, the glyphosate toxin, which is water soluble, which makes its way into our water systems. They're not filtering those things out anymore or ever because they're older technologies, right? And so people are flushing down their birth control pills or flushing down their Prozac and the toilet, and it makes its way through the system. And so we're all getting microdoses of these chemicals, organophosphates, these endocrine disrupting compounds, these medications, so forth, arsenic, fluoride. So we have to be able to take these things out and purify the water that we're drinking so that the body itself as a whole can be nourished because every physiological process, again, is governed by our hydration status. And the Prophet ﷺ was keen to drink. He drank water and he drank a certain way, and we know about that. And their water there was very clean. The Arabian water wells were very clean, right? And so we have to be able to come back to that and understand that water and toxicity, again, is huge and something very important. I mean, we have to come back to eating well, drinking well, sleeping well, which is huge, right? Because sleeping, we don't have enough time for all this. I mean, we need part two, but like the sleep, when you don't have enough sleep, you increase cortisol levels in the body. And cortisol is a stress hormone. And what does the body do when it is in a stressed state? It releases glucose, sugar, a lot of high force energy because sugar burns quickly and it has a good amount of energy. Uh, and so the body is blasted with this glucose and this stress to take care of whatever situation that it's in. Usually, in the past, maybe it'd be an actual threat. Maybe it'd be like a lion or a tiger or, a bandit on the highway or whatever. Now it's just lack of sleep. We know now lack of sleep can cause that same exact shift in the physiology. And so being able to find that relaxation, to find that good sleep, to find that deep rest is so critical, right? as well as exercise and the muscles using glucose as energy. They'll pull it out of the bloodstream. That's the main way that we regulate blood sugar. These hormones I mentioned earlier, insulin, amylin, glucagon, somatostatin, all these different things are governing biochemically, but the body as a whole also can regulate function by movement, by rest, by sleep, by meditation, prayer, dhikr, all these certain things. All of these things will help support the body. Everything plays a role. And so if you're getting into a nice rhythm, one is have shukr, so you can maintain it. But also just know that everything, water to the dhikr, to your walks, to your choice of diet, you're eating fermented foods, for God's sake. I didn't mention that earlier. The fermented foods, foods that have been pickled, foods that have been fermented with a natural culture, like kombucha or kefir yogurts or whatever it is. These things support the microbiome, the diversity and the health of the microbiome, affecting everything connected to it, which is the rest of the body and the psyche. And so all these things will play together. And so the more we can bring in of these pieces, inshallah ta'ala, the better in time.
Inshallah, doctor. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing the tips and the ways of dealing with it. Um, I have a few questions here. I try to rephrase. It's almost similar, but slightly technically changed. The first question is, dear doctor, uh, I have been diagnosed recently as diabetic. Diabetic, and suddenly I had like an anxiety trigger in me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, how do I go about it in dealing with it besides taking the medicine? Then
Anxiety.
the next question is,
Mm-hmm.
I have anxiety checking, medical checkup. Also, how do I go about it to make myself calm in facing whatever outcome that is coming from the test?
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, mashallah. So with the first case, right? Um, like we talked about, that's a natural. I mean, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be diabetes. When you have a condition that's new, it's scary. And you're in new territory and it comes out of the blue and you think, I never thought that would happen to me. And it's it's a jolt for us, right? It can be scary. And so that's quite natural that you're feeling anxious now. It's quite natural, of course you are, right? Of course you are. You're in a new place now. And there's a new opportunity now for you as well that you should know about. But being able to first sit with yourself and to acknowledge that this is what's happening right now. The anxiety is always looking for outs. It's looking for ways to manipulate the environment. It doesn't has a problem when you're anxious. There's a difficulty with being in the present moment, being the present moment, being real. Which is not, again, I'm not shaming and criticizing. This is reality. It's how it is. Anxiety pulls us out of the moment into the fear of the future, you know, and the grief pulls us out of the moment and looking into the past and all the woes of the past. So when you're in a state of anxiety, you want to be able to invite yourself back into that present moment where you could say, Alhamdulillah, this is from Allah. This was destined to me from before I was ever a thing. And or my ancestors were ever a thing. And to say Bismillah, okay, so Allah is telling me something, that I'm doing something wrong here, and maybe because I need to come back to Him in general. Allah will use illness as a way to pull us back into Tawbah. You make some corrections in your lifestyle, then you'll probably make some corrections in your spiritual lifestyle. You'll probably make Tawbah. And Allah will use that. It can be a great blessing. This is why disease, is a blessing for the believer, because the affair of the believer is always good. Alhamdulillah. And so for us to be able just to recognize this is not something wrong with you, you're not blameworthy for it, but there's something that Allah is bringing your attention to. And for us to be able to slow down and recognize these things, I recommend listening to Quran, to dhikr, to partaking in these types of things, to doing counseling. If you feel open to doing that, finding someone safe, someone who understands maybe the Muslim psyche, but also is well versed in the psychological and the emotional, that can help you kind of just drop into whatever the state that you're in, and to feel that and to process that. All these emotions have to be digested. Emotions have to be processed. We can't avoid, right? We have to be able to go through things, and going through them, you uncouple the intensity of them, and you help that emotion transform you and help you grow, right? It's emotions are food for the soul to grow when you let them, right? We're not people of suppression as Muslims. We're people that were tried and we're forbearant, and we go through it, and we stay with Allah, and we ask for help, and we ask for help from other people, and this is how, right? It's a normal state. Anxiety is something, it can get out of hand, of course, but it's something that if you're finding with a new diagnosis an anxiety there, okay, bismillah, take your time with it. Become present. Sit down and notice your feet on the ground, and notice your breath, and slow it down. Put some nature sounds on your YouTube, and close your eyes, and say salawat for 10 minutes, and just slow it down. And these are things, it's basically stress management techniques that we have to be able to find what works for you. Some people like to go for a run. Some people like to do dhikr. Some people like to sleep, whatever it is. Some people like to go see their friends and just laugh with their friends for a couple hours over tea and just get it out. That was a good night, alhamdulillah. I had laughed with my good friends. There's a medicine in that, right? So that's what I'd say for that. And I forgot the second example. Forgive me. What was the second example of anxiety?
It's almost the same, but this time is like you're afraid of the medical checkup outcome.
Oh
So
yeah,
how do you deal with it? Yeah.
yeah, mashallah. Again, similar. We have to become able to accept reality as it is, right? We have to be able to be open, and so as opposed to being fear, and this is something that I explore with counseling patients. This is something specifically in counseling that we can go into deeply. I can't go into it now, but in general, being able to open up into curiosity. It's when we go into these states of anxiety, there's a type of closing in on the walls, the type of collapse and type of dissociation that happens. And so in some way beginning to find how I can begin to open up to something bigger than myself, which is Allah, right? Which is the family unit, inshallah, that's loving and warm and embracing, which is the love of the Prophet ﷺ, which is all these different things, right? But being able to open up into something that's much more than the confines of that specific emotional state. That is where you'll find happiness, curiosity. I mean, I invite people that get, anxious before, giving a talk or something. They get stage fright. It's like, use that energy and make it like, like become excited about it. Like instead of being, I'm anxious. I don't want to be anxious. I don't want to I don't want to be swallowing my spit, my saliva, and I don't want to be, doing that when I'm talking and stuff. But it's like, if you use that energy, you can channel that energy into a new place where now it's just like, I'm really excited about giving this talk right now, and I have a lot to share with you, and let me share my passion with you, and let me see how I can transmit to you what I know, and maybe you can tell me what you know, and we can grow, and that anxiety can become transmuted. It's like an alchemy, right? It's an alchemy. If you keep it in one state, nothing's going to happen. But if you get it into motion, motions have to be in motion, right? It's energy in motion. So finally, I'll leave you with one thing. If you can't shift it, move your body. Move your body. Go for a walk. Do some qigong. Go on YouTube, type in qigong, and learn how to breathe and slow down. But move something. You have to move something. When you move something, you will move the emotion. If you sit put and just let your mind just roam, you'll do that all day, all week. I mean, we all know that kind of thing, right? We all just sit there and just going and going. Move the body. Move the body, you move the mind. The body-mind connection is one.
Inshallah. Beautiful. Doctor, we are reaching 1.5 hours. Mashallah, how time flies, and a lot of
Mm.
knowledge we learned from you. I think what you said, we agreed that we need a second part two in a process of refining that understanding and knowledge in terms of our body, our mind, our soul, and how do we deal with this chronic illness or any illness. Um, Before we end this session, we just like to ask you. I like to ask you, what will your advice be in general for people who have diabetes and all that? Yeah.
Hmm. Find a naturopathic doctor that can take you through the journey of understanding not just your diagnosis. Anyone can tell you that. That's pretty much a lab value on a test. It's pretty straightforward. But beyond the diagnosis, what your specific needs are to heal, because your healing journey will be different than somebody else with the same diagnosis. People that come to me with anxiety, I'll give them 10 people with 10 different types of anxiety. I'll give them different remedies, different diet plans, different herbs, do counseling with them, which is very individualized, of course. No one has the same life story and struggles and relational wounds as the other. Everything has to be individualized. There's no one size fits all, right? That's one thing. That's my big advice for people. In the meantime, I encourage people to read, to learn about their condition, not just diabetes, but just health. Keep it broad. We don't lose sight of the forest for the trees, as they say, right? Maintain the big picture. Understand that in your thoughts, in your emotions, in your sleep, in your exercise, in your diet choices, you are either creating health or setting up a condition otherwise in your body. And the more that we can align ourselves with the fitrah and the natural order of things and act as human beings more and more, the more that you'll be able to clean up your diabetes and clean up your depression, and your skin and whatever else aches and pains you have will all go away. They'll all go away. It's a genetic thing that needs a specific pharmaceutical drug or something. That's not how it works. You fix your life. And medicine should be supporting the nourishment and the detoxification of the body as it moves closer and closer to that normal. I encourage people, of course, with diabetes to um, have a type of low carb diet. Minimize their carbs, simplify their diets as much as possible. Have healthy fats, have fish, cook in butter and ghee and stuff like that. Um, to have a lot of vegetables, to eat fermented foods, to have bone broth. So cooking bones for 10 to 12 hours and using that broth as medicine. 1 cup in the morning uh, before breakfast. First thing you do when you're not fasting is to have a cup of bone broth. And that will heal the gut lining and restore the integrity of the microbiome and all of that, inshallah ta'ala. That's a great medicine. um, Hydrate, clean your water, use filters in your shower heads, right? Remove the fluoride or the chlorine, rather. Sorry, the fluoride from the drinking water, the chlorine from the shower heads, because the chlorine, when it's heated, it becomes aerosolized and it becomes neurotoxic. And oftentimes, there's a lot of chlorine in the water that when it vaporizes, it causes that type of effect on the nervous system. I remember when I first changed my filter years ago, I would always get headaches coming out of the shower. I didn't know why. Alhamdulillah, I was much healthier than I am now even. I didn't know I got headaches. And I remember coming out and learning about this, changing the shower head, the next shower, no headaches. I never had a headache after a shower in my home ever since. And that's because of the chlorine filter that was taken out. It forms chloroform. Chloroform is a neurotoxic compound. So doing that, getting good sleep. Honestly, I really encourage people. I know it's been difficult. I know you've probably already had bad habits from before Corona, but if you could fix this sleep issue, you will sleep. You will fix everything. Because it's like if you could sleep at like 9, 10 o'clock max, sleep at 10, and get up at 5 and pray your tahajjud or whatever time is appropriate, but like get up early and have that fajr time and read Quran and you're awake. Not like, I have to go back to sleep now and I only slept 2-3 hours, and my next day is gone. You already feel bad about, you're shaming yourself, and wake up and have full energy. How many of us do that? We have full energy at Fajr to read and maybe go for a walk and do some breath work and just to reflect, go into nature, look at the sky, look at the sun, be connected with what's happening around us, not just in our rooms and our little bubbles. Say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah outside, greet the sun. The Prophet would greet the moon. Why can't we greet the sun? Greet the sun in the morning. And these are things, these are practices, these are rhythms. These are rhythms which will connect you to your deep psychology and your deep physiology. Right? I encourage people to concern themselves with their mental health, do counseling. If not, see a homeopath. A homeopath can help with our anxiety and depression very much as well. I encourage people to exercise as much as possible, even getting a stationary bike at home if you can't leave the house. That's what I did at the beginning of the coronavirus, last March, and it was wonderful. I encourage people to meet as often as they can, granted circumstances, and safely, but meet people. We need that. There's a huge need, there's a huge need for connection and social engagement and touch and play with other people. We need it as children, we need it as adults just as much. Elderly people need it just as much as well. And so this is a core need. We need food, we need drink, we need water, and we need love and connection. And so these are things, inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah, beautiful, doctor. Beautiful. Thank you very much. Uh, before we end, we like you to have a closing dua.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم أمن علينا بصفاء المعرفة وهب لنا تصحيح المعاملة فيما بيننا وبينك على الكتاب والسنة وارزقنا الصدق التوكل عليك وحسن ظن بك وامن علينا بكل ما يقربنا إليك مقرون بعواف الدارين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم أصلح أمتي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم فرج عن أمتي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم ارحم أمتي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم أشفي مرضى أمتي سيدنا محمد وعافينا يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة.
Thank you, doctor. May Allah preserve you, and we hope to see you again on our online event, inshallah. For those who are watching this, you can join Dr. Mazen group, Forward to Health. There's a lot of knowledge we can learn, inshallah. Once again, thank you very much. May Allah preserve you. We see you again. Assalamualaikum.